All right, welcome back. The title of this mini lecture is Between the Wars, Part 1. So, we're going to talk about 5 terms that, as you read about Europe and the rest of the world in between the First World War or the Great War and the start of World War II, which starts in different places at different times, you should key in on these terms in order to start getting a sense of the complexities of the era. Let's dig into it. First term, Versailles. Now, Versailles is most famous, of course, for the palaces related to the French monarchy that used to be hunting lodges but were turned into these palaces at the end of the 17th century, largely by King Louis XIV. The Versailles Treaty Conference, or Peace Conference, though, between 1918 and 1919, brought an end to the First World War and created or constructed or attempted to construct a post-war world that some felt would be a just peace, but in many ways was a harsh peace. And you saw many different groups coming and flocking to Versailles to have their issues heard. Certainly, the efforts of Woodrow Wilson, President Wilson, and his support for self-determination meant you saw a number of different groups kind of coming there, hoping that they would be really able to, again, be heard. And again, they're not. So Versailles means many things to many people, but as a part of the treaty itself, Germany is forced to admit that it is guilty as far as the war goes, and they're going to be paying reparations. All right, and those are both going to have significant effect as the years go by. All right, 2, League of Nations. So as a function of the peace conference, there was a desire, largely by Wilson, although the United States doesn't join it, to create an international organization. The hope would be that it would somewhat replace the alliance systems that had tried to create a balance before the war, and the thought being that this would help to be able to oversee crumbling imperial territories, colonies, this kind of thing, transitions to decolonization, all of this. And the U.S., again, doesn't join. So even though the League of Nations is going to have a lot to do in international diplomacy in the 1920s and early 30s, particularly in the former Ottoman world, in many ways, it's sort of dead on arrival. It's not going to last. Third, the cenotaph. Following the end of the First World War, you're going to strongly see in the key nations that are involved in it acts of memory and memorialization. This is true as much for the English as it's true for the Germans, Americans to a certain extent as well. The cenotaph is in Whitehall, and it's this sort of memorial sort of thing that's put there temporarily. After the war is over, it becomes permanent, and for the British on the 11th of November, right, they come there all the time to mark the importance and memory, especially of the veterans of the Great War and for those who died. And it's a very powerful and moving thing. Now, what this meant, or what this kind of began in many ways, were acts of memorial culture centering around the Great War. And there would be many of these with monuments and statues and battlefield tourism and all kinds of aspects of this as the years go on. Fourth, the Irish Civil War. Ireland was still a colony of the United Kingdom here, right? It had been brought in supposedly as a part of the Act of Union, but in many ways its colonial status during the war led those who sought independence to rise up. So the Easter Rising, the Easter Rebellion in 1916 would be a good example of this. And as a few years went on towards the tail end of the war, you have a civil war that exists within Ireland. Amongst the different areas of Ireland, you have a religious separation and you have a political separation. Those in the north, right, you have this separation, and especially throughout the rest of the south, you have this separation as well. Now, those who supported independence fought largely against British rule and the presence of British rule in Ireland, across Ireland, and they're fighting for a united Ireland. Now, the end result of this civil war is going to be a treaty whereby a free state is created, this sort of somewhat independent part of the South, but what will become Northern Ireland is being partitioned off and separated here. And this is something that many within Ireland, those who are seeking a united Ireland, cannot account for, cannot allow. So throughout the 1920s, the Irish themselves will have their own civil war over this. And what will come of it is an Irish Free State that is led by Eamon de Valera, who had been anti-treaty before this, and who will, progressively kind of take Ireland independent. Although the hope to bring in Northern Ireland as a part of it, won't work in his lifetime. The fifth point for us is prohibition. So certainly the effect and power of the United States by the end of World War I is something to note, but by 1919, America goes dry. And what will happen then with the prohibition of alcohol, of course, is a large illegal culture of the consumption of liquor and a moniker of the Roaring Twenties, which will be backed up by a lot of this. So this is the era of gangsters like Al Capone. This is the era of gang violence in the service of this. And this is the era of speakeasies and bathtub gin and sort of all of that. All right. Thanks so much.